fellow Americans.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
Let me ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, you're particular, and there's 4 groups out there, and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions of relevant resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You have indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access.
Compelled. Well, okay, compelled. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the President now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the Major's. The Major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the President have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Rationality belongs to the cool observers, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith of the proletarian requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by myth makers to keep the ordinary person on the right course.
That I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe. is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I was
you've already
still in
done.
Parliament...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. You get NIH, one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's send Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is
molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
not.
Can't
get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth. You are the one.
Time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible to result in SARS-CoV-2.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it. And you admit the truth. And you implying...
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And this is a show where we try to cover the news the mainstream media largely ignores. We try to cut through the propaganda. And we've got a lot of news to get to on the show tonight. We're going to look at this TikTok bill 686. We're going to look at the Josh Hawley version of the bill, which is more of a narrow version of that. The fighting that's been unfolding in Congress over free speech and censorship and what that looks like. So we'll cover that on the show tonight.
We also are going to look at global instability of financial markets as it relates to geopolitics. We have a great guest on today, Nick Bhatia, who wrote the book Layered Money, and I was excited to talk to him about what he thinks is a great alternative to the fiat currencies we're also kind of terrified of lately. Plus, Whitney Webb is going to be here. She's going to tell us about this Epstein deposing of JP Dimon. The bank fought like hell for that not to happen. That's I said JP Dimon.
Well, you just truncated it instead of JP Morgan.
You know,
JP
Jamie
Morgan's
Dimon of JP Morgan did not want to testify in the Epstein trial. A judge ruled that he has to. We're going to pop some popcorn for this one.
Yeah, so Whitney Webb will be joining us in a little bit on that. And was the United States involved in the protests in Israel? Were they there trying to create or foment a color revolution by putting in their own instigators? Well, that's what Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government thinks about it. So all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Welcome, everybody.
All right, it's Thursday. Thursday's the new Friday, so let's get crazy. Let's get crunk.
Yeah, let's get crunk. So welcome in on the big show. And you know, if you guys really want to piss off YouTube right now, smash that like button. They love to suppress independent media. They love to suppress this type of content, stuff that flies in the face of their narrative. But one thing that they really don't control, and we've seen this repeatedly, is when you actually hit the like button during our live show, it pushes us out into a bigger, larger audience who then can be informed and learn just the way that you guys do. So it's free. Hey, our show is free. All we ask is if you just hit that like button. It'll help us tremendously. Plus,
we want to tell you about our Redacted community. It also comes along with a Redacted newsletter. Now, you can join the rebellion as a Rebel VIP. You get access to exclusive content that we put there. It also helps us to just keep in contact with you a little bit more closely because social media, of course, the algorithm is not your friend, as Russell Brand likes to say. So, we really covet a place that we can speak to you without these intermediaries. And so we would very much appreciate if you join our community over there, and we offer you some extras. While you're there, you can also sign up for the newsletter. Just put in your email address, and that is absolutely free.
Where do they go?
Go to redacted.inc.
All right. Redacted.inc is the website.
Hey, I have an announcement, too. I don't mean to fill everybody with a bunch of announcements right here at the beginning, but today is the last day to get the Silence Equals Complicity t-shirts.
Oh, yes. Did you see the tweet? We got a viewer who sent us an image of them. Chris is a veteran and sent us this image. Do you have it?
I'm trying.
Okay.
If you have it, did you put it somewhere?
I put it in the Redacted chat.
Okay. So, well, then text it to me.
It was. Anyhow, from Victoria, Canada, said he likes it so much that he and his wife are both going to have matchies, and that's very excited.
There he is.
This is the last time that you're going to be able to get it.
Yes, there he is. That's a handsome shirt.
It's not on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm not seeing it on the laptop. Hang on, let me double check the laptop.
Okay.
All right.
That's at redactedstore.com.
You got to wait for it because this is a good-looking shirt on a good-looking Redacted viewer, and we are excited about it.
We're getting there.
There it is.
There it is.
Boom.
Veteran? Yes. There he is. Chris,
he did not give us permission to send that, but
it's on Twitter.
Yeah, he sent it on Twitter, so I think that should be okay. I hope that's all right. I should have asked.
Well, yes, there it is. Silence Equals. We asked people to send, when you guys get the new shirts, please send them to us. Photos of yourself in the new Redacted shirt. Yes, today is the last day that you can get the shirt. It ends tonight at midnight, I guess is what David just said. So, yeah. So don't be silent, because that's complicity in all of this craziness that we're dealing with right now. All right, let's get to a couple of our top stories today. Let's start with this. Well, first of all, the U.S. State Department, just a few minutes ago, issuing a new alert for those Americans traveling to and from Russia. Get out now. Get out of Russia right now. Okay. Well, this is like the 5th time that they've said this.
Yes, it is.
And we're getting word also from the Zelensky camp. There's some weird stuff going on right now in Ukraine as it relates to President Zelensky coming out basically saying, hey, the West has been sending us weapons that don't work. And they know they don't work. Okay. We're also getting reports that tanks are being sent. And this is a really unbelievable report. We're going to dive more deeply into this. That Western tanks are arriving and they're being told, don't put them on the front lines. So what are they then being used for? Are they being used for show? Like, don't put them in the front lines where they'll be destroyed. Just
It's
keep
like
them
the stuff
for,
that you give to, those donation groups that maybe come and take stuff off of your front porch. You're like, just take the stuff we don't want to.
Yeah, but don't put it on the front lines to fight. We want you to just to like have photos with it so you can see it on the, like, we can do photo ops with it, but don't use it in battle because they will be destroyed. So don't put them on the front. What the hell's happening here? And then this in Austria.
Yes, politicians in Austria walked out of a speech by Ukrainian President Zelensky on just today. What they did was placed a sign in front of their seats. You see these signs they're pulling out that are pink and blue. The signs say either a place for peace or a place for neutrality. They're sort of alternating. This was from the Conservative Party called the Party of Freedom. They had warned that if Parliament authorized Zelensky to speak to the entire Austrian Parliament, they would stage some kind of demonstration because Austria's current public-facing position is that it supports Ukraine politically, but it will not send weapons or engage militarily in this conflict with Russia because Austria is neutral and its constitution requires them to be neutral. One of the party leaders, Herbert Kickl, said, "It is sad that the FPO is the only party in parliament that takes our everlasting neutrality seriously, thereby also standing up for peace." They are the 3rd largest political group in Austria. They have decent representation. They are not fringe, although the media is calling them a far-right group. See the Al Jazeera headline about this today. Austria's far-right lawmakers walk out on Zelensky's speech. So apparently now being peace-mongering is a far-right thing to do. The left can no longer claim any stakes on peace. But this is a shocking thing to do because we see how much of a, I'm going to use this term again, how much of a media darling Zelensky is.
Right.
And so these people dare to say, we're not getting in on this party. We want peace.
And he's begging for more weapons. Go ahead, David.
First of all, I applaud them. But second, I couldn't hear audio. Was Zelensky already speaking when they did that, or did they do that pre-entering the chamber?
He's there on, and he was doing one of his famous Zoom calls. So they had the TVs lined up in the room. He didn't show up there to give a speech.
Yeah, are we able to play it again? You can see, like, there is sort of a pan to the left that you see the video call happening.
Yeah.
Go ahead and play it again if you can. See that in the bottom left? He's speaking. People are, watching, and they are kind of like, we warned you about this.
We're done.
We're not taking sides.
We're out of here.
I was just hoping he saw it.
I wondered the same thing. If he had an in-feed.
And I mean, there's just a lot of frustration you're hearing coming out of the Zelensky camp today, and you have to see, and that's why I think you're getting these missiles lobbed back. We're getting weapons from the West that aren't working. We're being told not to use them. They're specifically sending us weapons that don't work, and they know they don't work when they're sending them to us. Like, is he now letting the cat out of the bag? Like, this is clearly what's been happening all along.
Like, he's at an inflection point. Like, maybe we're not set up to win.
Yeah, maybe we should tell everyone the real truth here now, suddenly. Like, that's what's going on here. It's kind of crazy. And so there's a lot of really weird things happening over the past 24 hours as it relates to Ukraine and Russia. And of course, as you're seeing this U.S. dollar dominance declining, you're going to see more of this saber rattling in the coming weeks as we head into the spring weather. But we want to get to this big story. We have 2 big bills making their way through Congress right now, and that are looking to ban free speech, take away your rights. So let's talk about them. The first, the largest one, really is Senate Bill 686, which is known as the Restrict Act, the restricting of the emergency of security threats that risk information and communications technology, the Restrict Act. So this is a bill introduced in the Senate designed to ban the video sharing app TikTok, which would give the Biden administration like all sorts of authority. And not just the Biden administration, then any president after that, right? It would to crack down on transactions between people in the United States and countries deemed, quote, foreign adversaries. So any kind of transaction, it goes beyond just TikTok. It's being talked about as if it's TikTok, but it's way bigger than that. Related to information and communications technology. So that's the Restrict Act. It would authorize the Commerce Secretary to also, quote, review and prohibit certain transactions between persons in the United States and foreign adversaries and for other purposes. Vague much?
Well, and when you say that, think about what we were just talking about yesterday, where they'll be able to shut off your finances. They will know that you're making those transactions. So it's like this is opening up exactly what we just talked about yesterday. It's like it's all falling into place.
Well, TikTok is not mentioned by name in this bill, in the Senate bill 686, but the introduction of it comes as Congress, of course, is looking to ban the app separately. Already, so they're kind of lumping these together, so we should have that distinction. And of course, the Chinese company ByteDance owns TikTok, and the idea is that, hey, since TikTok is Chinese owned, then therefore it's obligated to share user data with the Chinese government, and then that can be used as a spying tool. And I love that the United States government says this with a straight face. Like after what Edward Snowden uncovered about what the United States government...
It's just so rich.
Right. Like, we're concerned about the Chinese government snooping on people who download TikTok, but you in the United States government through the NSA were literally listening in and eavesdropping on American citizens without their consent, not even through any app that they consented to. It's not like they downloaded the NSA app and they were using the NSA app that you were ripping off and see, right? They were doing it nefariously.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's almost like they're ignoring the Twitter files.
They absolutely are.
Yeah, it's
ignoring the Twitter files. They are trying very hard to ignore the Twitter files.
Well, what do you mean by that for those of our audience that might not understand the context here?
Well, they're watching what people do on social media. The Twitter files have told us that,
right.
And they're working to censor speech
right.
around the Twitter files. But that's less about spying as it is about tracking. But at the same time, I feel like anyone who's mentioned in the Twitter files, like, oh, we censored Christiane Northrup or whatever kind of actor, it must feel like, oh, government actors are watching me and,
right.
Watching my freedoms, and that must feel scary. I think it's important to wind back the clock just 2 years when President Trump had negotiated with TikTok to unload a portion of its ownership to a domestic country. TikTok said it was willing to do that. They had a deal with Oracle, I believe it was at the time, right? And they were about to do it, and Joe Biden shut that down when he took office. So this could have happened a long time ago. Congress didn't decide to take this seriously until it benefited them. And, at the time they just were like, this is Trump. He's going to be impeached. He's doing something to distract us. Forget this. We don't care. Oh, all of a sudden they care when they need anti-Chinese rhetoric.
So the FBI and the NSA have a backdoor access tool to Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and a lot of other U.S. tech firms, right? So the FBI and the NSA have a tool, a backdoor access platform to that access. How is this any different? And why have they not stopped this? But we're concerned about China and people using TikTok. And then, what does this portend for larger concerns, of course, around free speech, right? So that's where this second sort of more narrow bill comes into play, where we want to talk about that. This is the Senator Josh Hawley bill. This is called the No TikTok on United States Devices Act. The idea is that, TikTok in its terms of service says, we have access to everything on your device, which I don't understand how exactly that's possible, especially on Apple devices, which are sandboxed, meaning one app is not allowed to have access to other parts of the operating system. That's not allowed to happen. So I'm not exactly sure how that actually unfolds. We know that Facebook was doing the exact same thing, by the way. Facebook got in trouble by Apple because they were, David, maybe you remember this was about 3 years ago now, but Facebook got in trouble by Apple And Apple actually threatened to take Facebook off the App Store when it was discovered that Facebook was like nefariously like patching in. People were wondering like why their battery was draining so much on their iPhones. It's because like Facebook was trying to tap into other parts of the software that they weren't allowed to by getting access to your contacts and certain other things. So I don't remember exactly, but I know that Facebook was doing this. Why don't we ban Facebook too?
Well, and that's the thing, like TikTok does the same thing. And like if you go into what TikTok actually gets access to, they're actually getting access to your camera, to your microphone and stuff like it is a lot further than a lot of these other things go. And it's like there's more detail behind what they're getting with those things. So it is a little bit more, but you're right. It was that's what Facebook was doing, was encroaching on the personal data that Apple says we protect that, and they were getting access to it.
So you opt in to use your camera. Like when you download TikTok, I mean, you have to give it access to your microphone. You have to give it access to your camera.
You do, but you're limited on what they can do with that. So so they went beyond the limits of what they're allowed to do with that, like turning it on themselves or whatever. Like there's other tracking things involved with TikTok that they get access to.
Yeah. So it was Oracle and Walmart just 2 years ago that had partnered up, made an offer for TikTok. It was preliminarily accepted, and this was already negotiated under President Trump. This could have been done already.
Right.
But the Biden administration decided it was unnecessarily until now.
Suddenly now it's a big concern because of China, right? Because we want to saber. Again, this all comes back to the U.S. dollar. It all comes back to U.S. dollar reserve currency hegemony in the world. And we're using everything that we can right now. We're flying into Taiwan to stir up shit. We're sending ships to the South China Sea. We are doing everything we can right now to saber rattle against China. So let's just go into this Josh Hawley bill. This is the one that's really interesting here. This is the No TikTok on United States Devices Act. Well, not really any more interesting than 686. That's awful enough. But this one got into a heated debate last night on the floor of Congress. We want to bring it to you. So Senator Josh Hawley's bill would prohibit the app from being downloaded in the United States, and it would ban any commercial activity on TikTok with their parent company, ByteDance. And this legislation is much narrower, we should be clear, than the 686 Senate bill, the Restrict Act, which was first rolled out in the Senate. So here is Josh Hawley. I'm going to play first Josh Hawley's defense of this bill, and then I want to play Senator Rand Paul, who really, I think, dismantles and really shows you exactly what's at stake by censoring this app and free speech. Watch.
Senator from Missouri.
Madam President, let me just finish with this, that the Senator from Kentucky decried the collection of personal data by American social media companies, and he's right to do that, by the way. I'm concerned about that too, no doubt. But he pointed out that many American social media companies collect all of this information, that they do it without the user's consent. Sometimes they sell it to third parties for a profit, and you can't necessarily opt out of it. All fair enough, but he is protecting exactly what he decries. The difference is with TikTok, that information is going to a hostile foreign government. It's not a market, it's total control. So I would just say this to Americans out there who are using TikTok. Just know this, we need to tell you the truth about this app. Just know this, if you have it on your phone, it is tracking your keystrokes, it is tracking your movements, it is tracking your location, and it is sending that information, whether you want it sent or not, to Beijing, to the Communist Chinese Party, where it can be accessed by anybody there who wants it under China's national security laws. That is a threat to your personal security, and that is why we should act to ban it. Let me just finally ask Senator from Kentucky, he and I talked about this before, would the senator consider allowing us to set a roll call vote, an up or down roll call vote, not unanimous consent to pass, but to set a roll call vote at a time certain? Would the senator consent to that?
Madam President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Reserving the right to object. I'm unlikely to take First Amendment advice from someone who believes that the First Amendment doesn't protect the Communist Party. You'll find no greater foe of communism, no greater critic. I've been a long-standing critic of, really the funding of research in Wuhan that led to the virus. And yet I still want to protect the basic Bill of Rights, the First Amendment that protects his speech, whether we like it or not. And if someone doesn't understand that communism actually is included under the First Amendment, that terrible speech that we object to is included under that, this is something we should be very wary of. We should beware of people who peddle fear. We should beware of people who peddle half-truths. Almost everything that's been said about collecting data is in all likelihood true. All the social media companies collect data. They devise algorithms. Some of the domestic ones have psychological experiments that might horrify you to see what they've got all the young kids thinking and doing and trying to get them to click on different pictures or trying to get them. This is a marketing stratagem, and they all do it. And they all want to make money, and they all want to get clicks. The difference is this. Many people on the right, in fact, some on the left, they are horrified by big tech in our country. They're consistent in being horrified by the abuses of big tech here and also TikTok. But look at their legislative proposals. Many of them would actually ban big tech here as well, or put it under the thumb of government, or set up government agencies or panels to determine what speech would be acceptable. And if you're not putting enough conservatives on there, by golly, we're going to have a government commission that's going to determine what kind of content gets on there. These are scary ideas. Don't succumb to fear. Don't give up our freedoms. Don't say that, oh my goodness, we're going to ban 150 million Americans. This isn't just about the company. This is about the rights of 150 million Americans to get their content. You're restricting what they can do, and you're restricting what they can use, all with innuendo. Everything that's been said about, oh, this is a channel and a funnel to the government. These are all, to the Chinese government, these are all conjecture. These are all things they're saying happen. As far as the sale of the company, I don't think we should force them to sell, but I do believe in a heartbeat they could be sold. They're located in the Cayman Islands. They're incorporated in the Cayman Islands, and they could be sold at any minute. I don't think we should force them to sell. The majority of the shareholders are not Chinese. The two engineers that developed it are, but to say that the algorithm has to reside in China and is in one tiny place and isn't anywhere else is a simplistic notion of the way technology works. The company has bent over backwards to work with our government to try to set up something that would be reasonable, including more government oversight. So I, for one, will say that I will continue to defend the First Amendment, and those who believe that the First Amendment doesn't protect this speech are in the wrong, and they'll find that out when the Supreme Court rules on this. I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I would just say.
So objection and blocking of this bill, and that seems like we'll see what happens here on both of these, right?
Now, he brings up the Supreme Court, and I wanted to bring up a case that's currently before the Supreme Court because I think this is interesting. Right now, in the case United States versus Hansen,
the band Hansen?
No. This case has asked whether a federal law that prohibits the act of encouraging or inducing unlawful immigration for private financial gain should be struck down as unconstitutional infringement of free speech. As in, is it my right to encourage illegal immigration? Like, if I write a book, let's say, that says, illegal immigration is great, more people should do it because then we have more a stronger workforce or what have you. Is that my right to do under the First Amendment? Now, interestingly enough, we've seen all of this activity around people on the left and liberals saying that they don't want free speech because they find that it's dangerous around the pandemic, around the vaccine. They don't like free speech around gender ideology. They only don't like free speech when it's free speech that they want to protect. But here we see liberal justice, Sonia Sotomayor. I don't know, can I call her a liberal justice? I'm going to say she was appointed under Barack Obama. Yeah. She is generally considered liberal. And she does not seem quite open to overruling the law as an overbroad restriction that it violates free speech. Here's something she said in her question on the matter. She said, under this statute, we're criminalizing words related to immigration. And I thought there were only certain statutes that were immune to First Amendment challenges. Yeah, I have a cold. It's not.
Okay.
Words are not coming out.
I picture that Seinfeld episode when Jerry and Kramer get into it. And he's like, no,
I did say statute.
He's like, it's a statute. It
just didn't come out.
Jerry's like, it's a statute. And Kramer's like, no, it's a statue.
My words are a little blunted. Excuse me. I am making the case that she thinks that it is dangerous to criminalize words And that's not a position that's normally coming from the left these days. And I'm slightly surprised. She said, otherwise, everything else is subject to the First Amendment and strict scrutiny. So why should we uphold a statute, that time I didn't say it right, that criminalizes words? So this is a case to follow.
Well,
shut up.
I'm kind of
You
like
shut
in
up.
the camp of like, these are government devices. And so like if the government is providing that device, just like me as I have Google admin or whatever, Google Suite, I can decide what apps go on anybody that uses my service to connect their phone. So I can decide what apps they can get or whatever. It's kind of the same thing. If the government is providing that phone, they should be able to decide what apps you're putting on it, because those phones can get hacked. So I would vote for it in that case. But if it's a phone that they buy and they use for their personal selves, then I can understand the fight. But in my opinion, if it's just for government devices, I don't think that really falls under the same thing as free speech for us.
Yeah, and I cannot abide this timely caring about things when it's convenient and then not caring about them when it's not. There is no question of like, oh, are we trying to protect people from, are we trying to protect children because of their self-confidence or anxiety or what have you? Like, that's not even a part of the conversation. It's just feels like it's a pawn in a game that Congress is trying to play.
But that's
part of a bigger narrative.
But that's where it started. It started with, this is we can have that discussion about how damaging it is for kids to be sitting there just like getting these like little videos that
we can and should. And just today we saw Elon Musk adding his name to a document that's asking for computer science experts to put a 6-month pause on artificial intelligence research because he thinks we need to sit and think about what this technology is doing to us. That's an appropriate way to move forward, taking a pause to think about how this technology affects us. But that horse is out of the barn with TikTok a long time ago. The time to have done that has passed. And so the timing of this now is so transparent of who it benefits to talk about this right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep our eye on this.
The hold that those apps have on people, imagine if they just deleted TikTok, like kids' lives would explode. I mean, we would have this, all of a sudden, this huge influx of mental and social issues and everything if that app went away.
What do you mean?
You know what I mean? I mean, if their app, they live on that app. It's like you're taking that kid's home away from them. They would like freak. They would be crazy.
Can you, and Rand Paul makes the point like, oh my gosh, Republicans took away my TikTok.
Yeah.
And they would flip out.
Absolutely.
This might be the thing that they would vote for the very first time in their lives.
You want a civil war? There you go.
Yeah.
Take away their TikTok. They'd be forced to go back to Facebook. Can you imagine?
We'll get overrun by preteens.
Yes.
The country's
You know that episode of South Park where they close the Denny's and all the old people die because they don't know how to eat? This would be like that, but for young people. They close the TikTok and they would all like melt. Like the Wicked Witch of the West. Melting.
What would kids do? I mean, it's crazy. It's an addiction.
Well, I don't know. I asked my daughter, who's 16, and she watches a lot of TikTok. And I was like, what would you do if they actually did shut down TikTok? She just was like, probably just use YouTube stories.
Yeah, my kids are like, I can use YouTube Shorts. You don't want me on TikTok? Then
yeah, I mean, it really is a crazy addiction. I have to tell, I'm like, you realize what these companies are doing.
Yeah.
Right, with this like short form content and what they're trying to accomplish here. It's really,
Right.
Anyway, it's crazy. That's crazy. Well, we've got more news to get to on your Thursday. We're going to look at the deep ties between Jeffrey Epstein and Jamie Dimon. He's about to testify, going to be forced to testify in this U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit, this Jeffrey Epstein lawsuit. And oh boy, I hope we get some good questions. Investigative journalist Whitney Webb is going to be joining us for that in just a few moments. But first, are you an investor looking for an easier way to trade stocks? And would you like 17 free stocks? Well, with Moomoo, which is my favorite trading platform, there's no steep learning curve. It's a simple interface. It's easy to use, so even beginners can take advantage of the stock market in no time. Plus, it offers powerful tools, often reserved for the experienced investors, like customizable watch lists and advanced charting capabilities. And right now, Moomoo even has a powerful new earnings calendar, so you don't even have to hunt and peck around trying to find the earnings schedule for your favorite companies. Right now, for a limited time, Moomoo is giving away 17 free stocks. When you open your account, make your initial deposits. Even if you never do anything else with the account, you get to keep those free stocks. And for our Australian viewers, Moomoo has some great deposit bonuses. When you open your account, you can learn more about the bonuses for our Australian audience when you visit redacted.inc/Moomoo. Now, Moomoo has zero commission trades, and the app looks amazing on every platform, from iOS to Android to Mac and Windows. Moomoo can help you trade with advanced tools like their stock screener, their earnings calendar. So no matter what your skill level is, you'll find fantastic tools that can help you trade. Open your free Moomoo account today. Get access to zero commission trades and 17 free stocks when you open your account and you make your initial deposits. To learn more, check out our link. Go to redacted.inc/Moomoo. That's redacted.inc/Moomoo.
Here's a question we've been discussing. Is the U.S. dollar nearing the end of its global hegemony? Today, I invited a guest to talk about this, and maybe one of the few people that I really wanted to hear from the most during this tumultuous week in global finance. Nick Bhatia is the author of the book Layered Money. I've referred to it often. He's also an adjunct professor of finance at USC Marshall School of Business and founder of The Bitcoin Layer. This is a book that not only explains blockchain currency, but explains the history of currencies and helps really explain what we've been going through, where we've been and where we're going next. I find it an invaluable resource. So Nick, thank you so much for joining me. I quote your book often because I found it both practical, but also prophetic. So why did you write this book? Did you see, because when you wrote it, we weren't in the midst of this financial crisis, but it felt like you saw that coming. Can I ask you, was it just because you were reading the tea leaves, or was it really in the numbers?
Well, the reason I wrote the book is because I wanted to explain Bitcoin in a new way that hadn't been done before. And I knew in order to do that, I had to give a history of money through my lens, which was as a bond market trader. That's the background that I come from. I've spent time in the US Treasury market, on a desk, on a strategy desk, and just thinking through the US monetary system from the Fed and Treasury perspective. And when I look at the quantity of money provided to the system, whether explicitly or implicitly by the Federal Reserve over the last, let's say, since 2007, it becomes obvious that there are such big holes in the financial system that only the central bank is able to put bandages on.
Yeah.
And in that way, we have to explain Bitcoin in the context of the current financial system, which is a fractional reserve system that has broken in several places from 2007 to 2020 and has been bandaged by the Federal Reserve in all these places. And it only guarantees more monetary stimulus from the Fed as the economy goes through its business cycle, which is part of my, research as well.
Now, this week, China and Brazil decided to work around the U.S. dollar. So a lot of the shakiness of the U.S. dollar that you base your argument on is happening. We see similar agreements with Russia, Argentina, France, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. So in giving us the history of currency and then the history of the U.S. dollar, you show us why this is such a shaky place to sort of stake our claims. So do you agree that right now the U.S. dollar is kind of, for lack of a better expression, circling the drain and making the case that we need an alternate currency?
Not necessarily. So I believe that the US dollar and the Federal Reserve's position and the US fiscal position, all of these impact the trustworthiness of the dollar on the global scale. That is undeniable. We can see China, Russia, other countries that have made serious efforts toward going away from the dollar in terms of its dependency. Now, with that being said, the dollar, in terms of its usage in global trade and its position in debt capital markets as well as asset management, which is wealth storage. The dollar is the primary tool, and it's actually by several miles the leader on that front. And then take it one step further, what would be or what could be the challenger to the dollar on that front? I'm talking about true international settlement, global capital markets, and the denomination of the balance sheets of corporations around the world, and the debt and equity that they issue. There, if you look to China and you look to Europe, and Russia doesn't even have an international currency, Europe does, and China doesn't have an internationalized currency, but they're making certain efforts. So between China and between the EU, neither one of them has a currency that is even remotely positioned to challenge the dollar on a global capital market basis. So I want to establish that. But then if you take it one step further, we're talking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin benefits from the concept that all of the central banks and all of the countries around the world are competing with each other. And so in that global race to the bottom, you're saying circling the drain of the dollar. It's not only the dollar, though. It's all of the central bank currencies currently have no ability to sustain themselves in their current form, so they have to devalue against each other over time. And so, but in that relationship, I still do believe the dollar remains dominant for many, many years to come, and that the talk of China establishing international relationships over the yuan is slightly overblown and has been in the news really constantly since the year 2010, when the financial crisis was really starting to just slow down a little bit. Then you saw China start to make these announcements that we're going to go away from the dollar. Well, it's 13, 14 years later, and we still haven't seen any true internationalization or China opening its capital account, meaning that you can't actually settle yuan around the world. It's not possible without permission of the Chinese government. So we are still miles away from the dollar being challenged by other government currencies.
Okay. So what you're saying then is it's not just the dollar, it's all fiat currencies. And you present here this idea of king dollar. You say, amidst the global currency war, the dollar emerged as the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry of global currencies. You say that the pound sterling abandoned a gold standard in 1931 and officially ended its reign as world reserve currency. So that void was filled by the United States, but it's still sort of just one side of the same coin of fiat currencies. Is that a more accurate description?
Well, if you think about when the U.S. took over from the British pound sterling as the world reserve currency, this happened over several decades between, call it, the late 1800s and 1930s. But by 1970s, the U.S. had abandoned the gold standard itself. And so the U.S. dollar has stood on its own ground, meaning the source of the value of the dollar comes from a combination of trust, military prowess, property rights, etc., all the things that make the United States the United States. That is what the dollar stands upon. So if you compare military prowess, and you compare the internationalization of the currency, the trust in the rule of law, and relate it to other nations, not just in general, but relate it to other nations, you can see why the dollar might have a very long runway. Because if you compare property rights in the United States and China, what result is that going to spit out to you as an analyst when making the decision between these two currencies over a multi-decade time frame?
Right.
It's not easy to see China taking over the role of a global reserve currency from the United States, given what we know, because China isn't going suddenly to some commodity-backed currency that is going to attract demand and sustain value versus other things that might decline as fiat currencies devalue. So if that becomes the case, it's a different conversation. But as I see it right now, it's just not the case that China can really take that international currency role away from the dollar.
Now, what can we learn from the recent bailouts of the banking sector? You write that the Fed uses wholesale money and people use retail money. So the Fed was able to bail out banks with a different layer of money. How is that now going to affect us all? Because I heard you on the Tom Wheelwright podcast talking about how we didn't actually feel the full effects of the 2008 crisis. And so does this bailout mean we will feel it? And how will this affect all of us?
Well, if you think about the way that the Federal Reserve issues money to cover losses in the financial system, and it always teams up with the Treasury, right? Because the Treasury is the entity that has to support the FDIC, which has to support the banks in times of crisis. And then the Federal Reserve comes in and has their own facilities to backstop the system and guarantee liquidity to the system. So what we saw, despite seeing one new liquidity facility from the Fed, this BTFP facility, besides that, we saw nothing new. And so all we saw is another attempt to paper over the fractional reserve nature of the system by guaranteeing additional FDIC deposits beyond that $250,000 level. And that moving it from 250,000 to the theoretical infinity, or let's just say multi-millions, that move from 250 to, let's say, 10 million is nothing different than the move from 100 to 250 during the 2008 crisis. And it's no different from moving it from, it was originally between $3,000 and $5,000 when it came about in the 1930s. And so the increase of the amount of the federal deposit insurance backstop is in actuality nothing new. And what can we expect as Americans or as participants in the US dollar from this? Nothing new. We are in a global currency war that has been in effect for a decade and a half. Yeah. It is a rotation between easing of around the world, right? We've been in a tightening situation here in the US for the last year plus, but that's because we've had this, inflation episode that the Fed had to address. But once that fades, we'll be back into this devaluation rotation that we've been in for quite a long time.
And so the solution that you see then is a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, because you present this idea of layered currency as if, there was one-time coins and then there's gold and then there's paper money and then there's, numbers in a computer that we agree is money. But you think that this can be flipped. Can you explain this pyramid of a different layer of money in which Bitcoin is the dominant layer? I don't know if dominant's the right word, the top layer.
Sure. So Bitcoin is not issued by a country nor a company. It doesn't have any counterparty risk. It's actually a digital commodity. And in that way, we can compare it to gold historically, in that gold is a commodity. It doesn't have any counterparty risk. Nobody owes you the gold coin that's in your pocket. And in a similar way, if you have custody of Bitcoin private keys that give you signing rights to a balance on this ledger, you have money on your person, and that money is not owed to you, and it exists in ledger form on all the Bitcoin nodes around the world, and that's thousands of computers that keep this record. So there's no one server or one place that you could even bomb to shut this network down and this proof of ownership network. And in that way, Bitcoin has established itself as the preeminent and the dominant digital commodity in the world. And that digital commodity, I do view, will be used as a store of value to escape this competitive devaluation nature of fiat currencies, but it doesn't mean it will replace it and become the rails for all financial transactions over any medium-term time horizon. However, I do see Bitcoin taking a role of digital gold, being a store of value that people are able to keep outside of the current global state issued currency or even bank issued currency system that we use today.
You write that Bitcoin thrives amidst instability, and we see that happening this week. Bitcoin is hitting highs for the year as, you know, people are kind of scrambling about our economy in this exactly right now. And so is this what you would have expected Bitcoin to do amidst the geopolitical system?
It's a good question. And to be very honest with you, Bitcoin and its price behavior, it's such a volatile asset that it's almost difficult to judge any few weeks of price action based off of the news, because what we saw last year is an incredibly strong correlation between Bitcoin and the stock market. And as rates rose, we had risk assets fall in price as, you know, the discount rate increases, the present value of cash flows decrease. And we saw that happen to stocks, and we saw Bitcoin fall in sympathy. But it's not even in sympathy. It's because it's owned at the portfolio level by the same people that own stocks. And so they do trade as correlated assets. With that being said, Bitcoin has responded nicely to a banking crisis, for sure. And it has outperformed the S&P by a significant margin during the last couple weeks, really, since the Silicon Valley demise. But in that way, interest rates have also come down over that time horizon, which is in theory should be supportive to Bitcoin, as we saw, that correlation last year. When rates rose, Bitcoin fell. This year, rates are falling and Bitcoin is rising. So it's really hard to pinpoint the why. Rather, I like to look at Bitcoin's 200-week moving average, which is like a 4-year average price of Bitcoin. It's in a steady state of increase and has been since that average came about 4 years after Bitcoin's price history. So we see Bitcoin steadily increasing in price, and I do believe that that will continue.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate that you're unwilling to speak in hyperbole. Like I said, I've learned a lot from your book. I appreciate it a lot. And I want to recommend it again. So you can follow Nick Bhatia on Twitter at Time Value of BTC. You can seek out the book as well. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we let you go?
Sure. People can find all my work right now at thebitcoinlayer.com. We have a free newsletter and we have a YouTube channel, which is also free. So a lot of content for people to check out. We analyze Bitcoin through a global macro lens.
Okay. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
All right, we've got more news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to be talking with investigative journalist Whitney Webb around this Jeffrey Epstein, Jamie Dimon connection. You don't want to miss this. I'm crazy. She just wrote a new piece about the rise of Jamie Dimon, but this new lawsuit is going to force him to testify. What will we learn about Jeffrey Epstein? And what will we learn about the broader global financial system right now? Because he's actively involved from the very beginning of this total collapse that we're seeing since the 1970s. And we're also going to look at the latest in Israel. And was the United States meddling in Israel and actually meddling in those protests? Also, Dr. Asim Malota is going to be joining us because there's a bombshell new lawsuit against Pfizer. So Dr. Asim is going to be here as well on the show. He's giving a speech in Gibraltar soon, I think tonight. I'm not sure what time. Might be about to happen. I don't know. Anyway, he's about to give a speech on adverse events in Spain, and so we're going to talk to him about this. What's the craziness in South Africa with this lawsuit? So we're going to get there in a second. But first, the value of the U.S. dollar is in full decline, and if you're relying on a 401k or an IRA for your retirement, you are in for a world of hurt. What if you could invest in real estate that produces monthly cash flow, is a hedge against inflation, is a tax write-off, a tax shelter, arguably the best tax shelter in the United States, and all of it is 100% done for you? Well, meaning you don't have to hire contractors, hire property managers, or any of that. That's where Morris Invest comes in. And yes, it's our company. Our team is building about 500 homes this year in Texas and Missouri. We've got an amazing team. These are brand new construction properties built from the ground up. So our company is the #1 full service rental real estate company in the United States. No one even comes close to what we're able to provide. You could invest in brand new construction real estate in the best rental markets in the country. We're talking West Texas. We're talking Joplin, Missouri, and it's fully done for you. We have financing built into the properties. We work with over 100 different lenders. Right now, we have about 23 homes left for sale. They are first come, first serve. So if any of you are like high level investors, you are really interested in real estate investing, maybe you have some old investments you want to roll over using a 1031 exchange. That's a bit of a ninja, more advanced move. But if you are an advanced investor, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you want an incredible tax write-off and you want full service investing and with a team that can help you right from the moment you get on the phone, book a call with our team. All you need to do is the website is right there on the screen. Just go to redacted.inc/invest. Redacted.inc/invest. Again, that's redacted.inc/invest. Well, the tentacles of Jeffrey Epstein go wide and they go deep, and they reach right into Jamie Dimon, who is the JP Morgan chief executive. Jamie Dimon, he's going to be interviewed under oath now in these Jeffrey Epstein lawsuits. Investigative journalist Whitney Webb has been covering the story from the very beginning. She's written a great new piece called The Rise of Jamie Dimon on her website, unlimitedhangout.com. I encourage all of you to read it. So, what is this connection, this Jeffrey Epstein connection, and how big and wide does this go beyond Jeffrey Epstein? Investigative journalist Whitney Webb joins us now. Welcome back to the show, Whitney. Great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me back on.
My pleasure. And you've written, so first, I just want to start there at the beginning, sort of about Jamie Dimon, and then we can get into the broader implications of this and how wide this goes. Jamie Dimon going to be interviewed in Jeffrey Epstein lawsuits, and a lot of people hoping that we'll learn a lot more about this relationship and Jeffrey Epstein and these deeper connections here. So first, for our viewers who don't understand or have any idea why Jamie Dimon would be involved in this, who is Jamie Dimon and how is he involved with Jeffrey Epstein?
Okay, so for people that don't know, Jamie Dimon is the CEO, and he has been since the early 2000s, of JP Morgan Chase, one of the biggest banks on Wall Street. And he's considered one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, Wall Street banker today. And he's currently in the news in relation to the Epstein case because there is a lawsuit being brought from the U.S. Virgin Islands, which argues that Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking activity was directly enabled by Jeffrey Epstein, particularly by two JP Morgan executives. The main focus of the case being Jess Staley, who left the bank in around 2013. But they've alleged that lawyers for the USVI have alleged that Jamie Dimon himself was aware of the situation and directly enabled Epstein, and JP Morgan Chase has denied this and is trying to make Staley, essentially the scapegoat for the whole case and trying to keep Dimon away from it. But he's going to be Dimon is going to be forced to offer a statement or potentially be interviewed under oath. So it remains to be seen what's going on there and how deep those questions will go. Obviously, the U.S. Virgin Islands is making a very praiseworthy effort to hold this particular bank to account. And let's keep in mind that a few days after this this exact lawsuit was filed, the Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Denise George, was fired. And so a lot of people see a connection between that firing and her filing of this particular lawsuit, which has been allowed to advance in U.S. courts despite JP Morgan and Chase trying to prevent that from happening. So, but what hasn't been said, right?
No, I just want to ask you, so we'll get to the what hasn't been said part, but just to be clear, you say that JP Morgan Chase was enabling this sex trafficking by Epstein. That's what the lawsuit alleges. Can you be specific? How were they enabling that?
So someone that was actually at the hearing sent me a leaked recording of it, and there was a lot that happened there that did not make it into mainstream press reports. One of them being that it was very clear from JP Morgan internal reports that Jeffrey Epstein allegedly was having a financial advisory firm at the time, but his accounts at JP Morgan reflect no activity that would have potentially involved any sort of clients. It was very odd financial activity, and he was making payments to known victims of his sex trafficking scheme, and he was using JP Morgan to give significant loans to Jean-Luc Brunel's MC2 business. And Jean-Luc Brunel, of course, is a major part of the Epstein case, particularly as it relates to the sex trafficking activities. And he, of course, was arrested in Paris and died under the same circumstances as Epstein did in a jail cell in what was ruled a suicide, but is very unlikely to actually have been the case. And JP Morgan is alleged to have directly facilitated that because given their own internal admissions about the oddities of the report, the oddities of Epstein's account, something should have been done long ago and nothing was done. And they allege, the USVI say that they'll be providing documents that show that this went far beyond Gestali and actually go straight to the executive suite, meaning Jamie Dimon.
Wow. So what's not being said? I'm sorry to interrupt you earlier, but I want to know how this enabling process is unbelievable and much deeper than I even anticipated.
Yeah, so basically what's not being said is that the reason Jamie Dimon is head of JP Morgan Chase at all really has to do intimately with the circle around Leslie Wexner, particularly his right-hand man, John W. Kessler. So, Leslie Wexner has two hands, and as someone who's researched him a lot, essentially you have on the one hand Kessler and you had on the other hand Epstein. That's how close these particular associates of him were. And Kessler, in addition with a particular family from Chicago that's part of the same network I write about in the book that has a lot of connections to Wexner, the Crown family of Chicago, were essentially the people that orchestrated Jamie Dimon's installment as CEO of Bank One in the year 2000. So the Crown family essentially orchestrated the ouster of the previous CEO, and then Kessler and this sort of Wexner-centric team on the board of Bank One, along with the Crown family and their associates, came together and chose Jamie Dimon to be the CEO of Bank One. And Bank One, a few years later, was acquired by JP Morgan Chase, and Jamie Dimon was put in charge of that. So essentially what my article shows is what Bank One was before that point, and going way, 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 way back, very Wexner-centric, allegedly involved in all sorts of criminal activity, including money laundering, arms deals, and very shady financial connections with Leslie Wexner's The Limited, among other things. And on top of that, if you look at Dimon's history before he became CEO of Bank One, he was building Citigroup with his mentor, Sandy Weil, and that began with a company they acquired in 1985 called Commercial Credit Corporation. And as I note in the article, Commercial Credit Corporation and its parent company, Control Data Corp, are essentially espionage cutouts tied to these networks of intelligence and organized crime that were working together to essentially make money, but also were subverting U.S. National security by engaging in illicit technology transfers. They were spying on the U.S. military, and they were, essentially shipping off a bunch of sensitive U.S. military and other types of technology to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, in the same networks that include people like Robert Maxwell and his confidant and lawyer, the father of current U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Samuel P. And a lot of these people are intimately connected. As I note in the article, a lot of it seemed to have been centered around this particular think tank called the American Committee for U.S.-Soviet Relations, which had a lot of these organized crime figures, people close to the Crown family like Paul Zifrin, people close to Robert Maxwell, people like Armand Hammer, whose father was a Soviet spy and tried to buy a bank where a lot of U.S. congressmen had accounts for the purposes of financially blackmailing them. These guys were extremely aggressive in promoting tech transfers to the Soviet Union for the purpose of essentially equalizing the playing field in a sense. But as Samuel Pisar told Congress in the early 70s, it was to create a single unified world economy where you have private Western capitalist enterprises merging their activities with communist state-run enterprises and ostensible adversary nations with the goal of creating a global a single, economic economy. It's very disturbing stuff. And this company that was at the center of that is now Citigroup.
Wow. So a unipolar banking system, a unipolar order run by these unelected people running the world economy. That's basically, they laid this out in the 1970s.
So PSAR essentially said the nation state's becoming irrelevant because it's all about private enterprises in the West merging and intermingling with communist state-run enterprises in Russia and China and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the major facilitators of this were, people like Robert Maxwell, people like Samuel Pisar, and a lot of these other businessmen in this particular nexus that involve a lot of organized crime and intelligence connections. Because essentially, at the end of the day, they want to be, whoever controls the money controls the world, right? So if you build a single unified world economy, which you uniquely control, then you control everything.
And as you've pointed out in your piece and otherwise, that they've been at the heart of each of these financial collapses, right? They've been there right in the middle of it.
Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah. So, for example, in the 1980s, there was a major crisis with savings and loans, and you had an insane amount of collapses of savings and loans institutions throughout the United States. You had the situation with Michael Milken and the junk bonds, Drexel, Burnham, Lambert. All of these are very much tied to intelligence, organized crime connections. I detail a lot of this in my book, but there's, the work of Pete Bruton, formerly of the Houston Post, and a lot of reporting over the decades on that. And essentially what resulted, what came out of that is that, the federal government and the bodies responsible for handling these types of situations would take the collapsed institutions, bundle them together, and sell their assets off to stable financial institutions. And so, an entity like Bank One, which is very close to, Leslie Wexner, was absorbing a lot of these. And a lot of these banks today, these mega banks, these so-called too big to fail banks, just consolidating. So you have over time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of banks all over the country in the U.S. And it's slowly becoming fewer and fewer as banks collapse. And a lot of these banks collapse are engineered. And so this particular article I have up right now about the rise of Jamie Dimon is really just part of a series because I also have evidence that in 2008, that was, the collapse of Bear Stearns. Jeffrey Epstein essentially was if you want to see Bear Stearns as a giant bubble, the pin that popped Bear Stearns was Jeffrey Epstein. And then he goes and Bear Stearns gets folded into JP Morgan. And then he starts banking with JP Morgan, and all the stuff at the center of the lawsuit that we talked about earlier, are based in that period. But, it's a big benefit. The 2008, economic crisis, was very beneficial to these big bankers because all the failed banks they just absorbed and, became bigger and bigger and bigger. And what we're seeing now with the current banking crisis is much of the same. I would argue that you're going to see these banks collapse. A lot of I'm sure as you've covered on your show, a lot of these banks didn't need to be shut down like Signature Bank. They were only shut down because they were viewed as pro-crypto. The U.S. is having a regulatory crackdown on the crypto industry, and now they're being folded into other mega banks. It's just consolidation, and it's leading us towards this exact plan that was mapped out in the 70s, a one world economy, essentially.
Unbelievable. Not unbelievable when you see it all coming together like this in the web that you've uncovered here. One of the connections that you write about in this piece is where you point out that JP Morgan, their claims are that Jamie Dimon never really knew what Epstein was up to at all during his time. And as you point out, that makes it very difficult to explain given all of these connections. So their stance is they didn't know. He didn't know anything. He's totally absolved of this.
Yeah, well, it's hard to believe because the same people that are responsible for Jeffrey Epstein are responsible for Jamie Dimon being the top Wall Street banker in the country. And that's very significant. And, we'll see if this particular case questions him about people like John W. Kessler, his time at Bank One, and the financial circles around Leslie Wexner, because Leslie Wexner was on the board of that bank for a very long time and was actually at one point holding unclaimed funds for this bank that allegedly the state of Ohio couldn't find Bank One of the biggest banks in the state, to return them their unclaimed funds. And Wexner's on the board of the bank, but also can't find Bank One to return their unclaimed funds. And the Limited isn't a bank. It's supposed to be a retail, company. So why are they holding state unclaimed funds? I mean, there's totally a bunch of funny business going on here, and that was in the mid 1990s, not that long before Jamie Dimon took the reins of that particular bank. And as I noted in my piece, and I referred to earlier, Bank One was money laundering for Middle East arms sales, including for Iran-Contra. And as I've noted before in my work on the Wexner-Epstein stuff, they were intimately involved in that as well, particularly with their acquisition of the CIA's Air America, or renamed Southern Air Transport, in the mid-1990s, ostensibly to run cargo from the Limited between Columbus and Hong Kong. And this is at the time when Epstein is meeting at the White House with people like Mark Middleton, who were central to this Chinagate scandal, which is the same thing about this illicit tech transfers, but instead of the Soviet Union, it was to China. And you have the CIA airline that was involved in all that stuff before at the center of it, but it's very involved with Wexner's business interests. And Wexner, of course, is very involved in China and has been for a long time. The bulk of his retail industry is based there through his long-standing affiliation from the 70s onward with Mast Industries, which is based in Hong Kong. And he, was lobbying for all sorts of business deals all over the world to benefit China. For example, he was trying to create a joint venture between the Limited and Chinese state-run companies in the Golan Heights in what is currently held by Israel, but is actually Syrian territory. And he was meeting with the highest levels of Israeli intelligence and Israeli state officials to make that happen. Another example of private Western capitalist enterprises merging and creating joint ventures with communist state-run enterprises and this technology transfer stuff going on. Why did he need a CIA airline? Because before they teamed up with Southern Air Transport, they tried to get another CIA airline involved called Aero Air, and that didn't work out. And all these, there's hundreds of airlines in the country, but this is the one they wanted right after Iran-Contra. I mean, it's very bizarre. And you have top Iran-Contra co-conspirators being involved in securing that deal between Southern Air Transport and the Limited. People like Alan Fears and Richard Secord intimately involved in that. It's totally crazy. But I think people really need to understand this history because it's having real effects right now, because we're essentially at the end of the line of this decades-long plan where a network of people tied to intelligence and organized crime have created a transnational web where they've essentially completely any sort of military advantage the United States has ever had in technology, so selling it off to our ostensible adversaries. And at the same time, the politicians in power who themselves, like Joe Biden, have economic ties to these same adversary countries are leading us on a march towards war that, thanks to these efforts over the decades, the U.S. is destined to lose. Yeah. It's madness.
It's absolute madness, and we're absolutely seeing it. We're running out of ammunition. You have Mark Milley admitting that if we go to war, we have no...
We're sending all our money to Ukraine.
Right.
Or have been.
And we don't have the production capacity. We don't have the recruitment capacity, and we're heading right into World War III with these countries, which is insanity. What do you hope that you, as a journalist, what are you hoping would come from this testimony from Jamie Dimon in this Epstein lawsuit? Is there any specific nugget that if you could ask him a question, you would?
Yeah, ask him about Leslie Wexner and John W. Kessler, because as I noted in my piece, John W. Kessler was intimately involved with all these shady businesses and organized crime connections that resulted that came out of an investigation into the murder in broad daylight of the Limited's tax attorney in 1985. Very involved in very corrupt dealings. And there's a lot of very disturbing financial activity that was taking place at Bank One throughout Kessler's time. And the people that are responsible for Dimon being there is the organized crime-connected Crown family, which, among other things, controls U.S. weapons manufacturer General Dynamics. And then Kessler and the Wexner orbit, he's essentially there. Why are the same people that put him in charge of J.P. Morgan the same people behind Jeffrey Epstein? And, how would he not have known who Epstein was because of those connections? It seems very difficult to believe that there wouldn't be any sort of connection there, or that Jamie Dimon would have no idea who Epstein was and what was going on. It just doesn't really seem very credible. And I doubt he'll be asked about this deeper background to it. We'll see exactly how far the U.S. Virgin Islands is willing to go.
Yeah, to really push this question. I hope that they'll get deep on this and not, be given 1 or 2 word answers and then move on to the next question. Whitney Webb, I encourage all of you to read her latest piece on her website, unlimitedhangout.com. It's called The Rise of Jamie Dimon. If you want a deeper understanding of all of this and these connections, start there. Read also her 2 great books as well on Jeffrey Epstein and the deep state mafia, which is leading us into World War III right now and absolute destruction. Whitney, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show, as always.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Really great. I mean, just swallowing all out. People like in the chat, I love, as I glance over, people like, man, she is really sharp.
Yeah.
Yes, very smart.
Yeah.
So
amazing. All right. Well, we have more to get to, but first we want to tell you a little bit about our Redacted store. In the beginning of the show, we showed you a viewer who's wearing our Silence Equals Complicity shirt. That sale ends tonight if you'd like that limited time shirt, and it will look just as foxy on you as it does on these models, I'm sure, and all of our viewers. But we have more than shirts there. We have mugs, we have hoodies, we have different hats and things like that. And you can show your support for independent journalism and your support of this show, and maybe help raise awareness about this place of free speech and free thought. And we really appreciate you doing so. So head on over to redactedstore.com, get your merch, and support our free thinking and independent journalism. Once again, it's redactedstore.com. Head on over there and check it out. Redactedstore.com.
Are we seeing a color revolution in, of all places, Israel? That's right. Well, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's son, has directly now accused the Biden administration of meddling, being behind the scenes of the mass protests against the judicial process and the judicial reform that his country and his government have been pushing. The Biden administration meddling in other countries? No, it can't be. Dan Cohen, Washington correspondent for Redacted, who's covered Israel for many, many years, is here with the latest on this. So, Dan, meddling from the Biden administration in Israel? Wow.
Well, it's pretty remarkable to see this happening in, what is ostensibly the U.S.'s top ally in maybe the world, at least the Middle East. And really, I think, is a story about the U.S. trying to maintain what it calls the special relationship with Israel and keep a certain political element in power in Israel. So I want to give our viewers some background so they can understand this story. So in January, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu comes to power again, and this time with the most extreme right-wing coalition that Israel has ever seen, including his public security minister, a guy named Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we've spoken about before. He is what they call a Kahanist, a follower of the late Rabbi Meir Kahane, who's basically, they have the ideology of like ISIS, but Israeli, Jewish style. So that is the element that Netanyahu is kind of made common cause with in order to get into power. And that political sector wants to get rid of the Supreme Court in Israel. The right in Israel essentially wants to get rid of the Supreme Court because it views it as holding back its agenda. And Netanyahu has agreed to carry out a series of, to pass a series of laws that would weaken the Supreme Court and put more power in the legislature, in Netanyahu's coalition. So since January, there have been massive protests against this judicial reform, judicial overhaul. And it got to a point where earlier this month, the Biden administration, specifically Biden, put out a statement calling for some kind of compromise between the protesters and the Netanyahu government and saying that these judicial reforms are fundamentally anti-democratic. That sort of fell on deaf ears. The protests grew, and Biden put out an even stronger statement that coincided with the largest protests they've seen. This was on March 28th. Take a listen to what Biden said.
Like many strong supporters of Israel, I'm very concerned. And I'm concerned that they get this straight. They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully, the Prime Minister will act in a way that he can try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen.
So at that point, after that statement from Biden and these enormous protests and the threat of a general strike, Netanyahu put the judicial overhaul on hold, said, okay, we're going to table this and work something out. But at the same time, he sent out a message on Twitter taking a shot at Biden, and he said, Israel is a sovereign country which makes its decisions by the will of its people and not based on pressures from abroad, including the best of friends. So Netanyahu throwing some shade at Biden there. And remember, Netanyahu was caught years before in the early 2000s saying he is the most qualified Israeli politician to be the prime minister because he is so skilled, adept at manipulating the United States. And so he thinks that the United States should be subservient to Israel, where, of course, the United States wants Israel to serve its interests, which is why it pours so much money into Israel every year, $3.8 billion. So Netanyahu's statement was followed by another from Itamar Ben-Gvir, the public security minister, where he says, we are not another star on the American flag. So again, pushing back against the Biden administration from these top Israeli officials. So when Netanyahu put this judicial overhaul on hold, he had to give something to his coalition, to the most right-wing members of his party. So what he agreed to is the creation of what they're calling a national guard that is overseen by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, Ben-Gvir, again, he's one of the most extreme figures in Israeli society, wants to expel every last Palestinian, get rid of churches, get rid of mosques, and have only Jews in Israel. That is the ideology that he promotes. So his movement has tons of young, what you could compare to hooligans who go out in the streets and beat Palestinians. Most famously, they rampaged through cities where there are Palestinian populations in May of 2021 during the Israeli war on Gaza. They dragged a Palestinian from his car and beat him within a breath of his life. And that was actually broadcast on national television. Similarly, those mobs just a couple of nights ago tried to lynch a Palestinian taxi driver. So it's these kinds of mobs that will be formalized into a national guard. That is Netanyahu's giveaway, his compromise with his backers. So the big question about U.S. involvement in these protests, well, the Israeli right, as you said, Clayton, including Benjamin Netanyahu's son, Yair, have accused the U.S., the Biden administration, of orchestrating a color revolution, and there appears to be some real truth to that. A group at the center of these protests is called the Movement for Quality Government, and it is funded in part by the U.S. State Department. It's not a huge amount of money, but it does show that there is foreign involvement from the United States and that it shows where the U.S. government stands. There's also a clip going around on pro-Netanyahu, pro-judicial reform Twitter of former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's from a sort of more liberal wing of Israeli politics, closely tied with the Clintons, was a guest of Jeffrey Epstein, so kind of that milieu. And he says that Netanyahu is actually carrying out a regime change in Israel using the tools of democracy, and that the protesters are the counter-revolution. Listen to this.
So it's a clash. There's a top-down regime change using the tools, the legal tools of democracy, facing a counter-revolution from bottom up. And we will win. I'm confident of it. Because I know our people, and we have even empirical evidence for this.
So Ehud Barak, again, says that Netanyahu and his ilk are using the tools of democracy to impose this regime change, to get rid, essentially weaken the Supreme Court, and that necessitates this kind of foreign-funded, he doesn't admit it, but upswell that he uses the 3.5% language, that you have to get 3.5%, which is basically taken directly from the ideas of Gene Sharp, who is the father of color revolutions. He is he came up with the whole idea of how the U.S. would carry out color revolutions in Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And his kind of ideology, his ideas about how nonviolent protest can be used to overthrow governments have been incredibly successful and used by the U.S. all over the world. And now it appears that's what's being used in Israel. So there's another layer I want to talk about here, another sort of layer of complexity. The fact that American oligarchs have also funded Netanyahu and the settler movement, the hard right movement that he's kind of in bed with. But the difference, I think the key thing here is that the United States, on one hand, and these American oligarchs want to fund those groups to kind of carry out the project in Israel, to go build settlements, to get rid of Palestinians from Jerusalem. They don't want them to take ultimate power, to be in the sort of the top of the heap of the political spectrum, because the special relationship between Israel and the United States relies on the image that Israel is a democracy and that therefore we must support it because it's in this tough neighborhood surrounded by enemies. And in order to maintain that, well, you can't weaken the Supreme Court and have huge masses of liberals coming out to protest against the government. So I think that's why the U.S. is fundamentally getting involved here, to kind of keep the most hard right elements on the margins a little bit, not be able to have total power in Israel.
Well, given the accusations of a color revolution, regime change, that's what this is. What is the geopolitical angle here that the Israelis are accusing the Biden administration of? They want the Netanyahu government dissolved, gone, him out of power. Is that the ultimate goal?
I think the U.S. government is perfectly happy with Netanyahu as long as he stays within certain confines, and bringing these super overtly extreme elements into power who fundamentally don't have that, it's a very small amount of difference in policy. I mean, they want regular wars on Gaza. They want to, completely demolish it, just like the liberals do. I mean, Ehud Barak oversaw horrible wars against Palestinians and oversaw the occupation. But the key thing, I think, to understand here is that the U.S. wants to maintain Israel for its own benefit. So, meaning a weapon against Iran and a weapon against Hezbollah in Lebanon, especially as the U.S. is kind of losing its influence throughout the region as China is stepping in, working out diplomatic deals between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Syria and the UAE. So where China is putting out fires, the U.S. sees, wait a minute, we can't, have Israel kind of, go off the rails. We need it to maintain this image so we can continue to support it and keep our influence in the region, and especially as the threat, as the likelihood of a war against Iran increases, which there's not a lot of daylight between Netanyahu and the Biden administration on that.
Well, of course, the United States funnels billions of dollars to Israel on a regular basis in the form of weapons and aid on a regular basis. So it would make sense that Israel should be doing their bidding, right? That's kind of the relationship, it seems. Like, we give you this money, we give you these weapons, and then you fall in line with what we want, are driving our Middle East policy. You are the tip of the spear. You're the cudgel for us in the Middle East, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that money obviously comes with strings attached. So when in moments like this, there's some kind of daylight and that the U.S. sees there is a threat to the special relationship, that the sort of order in Israel, that you have, more liberal elements running the show and the kind of hard right-wing elements kind of more on the periphery, then it's time to, have some kind of intervention.
Well, we'll see what happens with this government. We'll see what this judicial reform looks like, if it's on hold or if it moves forward. Dan Cohen, who's been covering Israel for us, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Dan.
Thanks, Clayton.
And we've got more news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to be joined by Dr. Asim Malorta, who is going to be looking at what's this bombshell Pfizer story that no one else is covering. And we have an exclusive discussion with the Dr. Asim on this story, this bombshell Pfizer lawsuit in South Africa, where Pfizer will have to testify. And what will we learn from this? We're going to speak to the good doctor in just a moment. But in order to do that, we're going to have to move over to Rumble, because there are things we're going to be talking about as it relates to these vaccines that we are not comfortable talking about right here on this platform because of our past banning and blocking and censorship that we've received here on YouTube, where we've been blocked and banned 4 different times for covering Pfizer. So we will move over to Rumble for that segment with Dr. Asim. So come on over to our Rumble channel right now, which is rumble.com/redacted. Rumble.com/redacted. Our stream will